bucka. Haha. You know the deal.
The next thing we're going to talk about with fractions is multiplying fractions. But before we talk about multiplying fractions, let's just talk a little bit about multiplying in general. So here I've written an English sentence where suppose I have 3 baskets of 4 apples. If I want to translate this into a math sentence, really what I'm looking at here are these parts, 3 of 4. And if we were going to translate that into a math sentence, 3 of 4, this word of, well, if we have 3 baskets of 4 apples and I want to know the total amount of apples that we have to multiply here. So that word of translates into multiplication. So the sentence 3 of 4 really means 3 times. So when we're multiplying, as we talked about in the video on exponents, multiplication indicates repeated multiplication. So if we're multiplying 3 4 times, what that really means is we're adding 3 4 times. So another way to write this math sentence would be 3 plus 3 plus 3. Or 3 times 4 is the same as 4 times 3. So another way we could look at this is if we're timesing 4 by 3, it means that we're really adding 4 to itself 3 times. So it's the same as saying 4 plus 4 plus 4. And whether we're adding 3 to itself 4 times or 4 to itself 3 times, either way, the answer there is the same. It equals 12. So again, multiplication is just an indication of repeated addition. We either add this number this many times, or we add this number this many times. And it doesn't matter which one we do, either way we get the same answer. So suppose we have a question now that involves a fraction, a multiplication question that involves a fraction. Well, if we want to write this as repeated addition, I can think of it like I'm adding 3 1/5 of a time. But that's a little bit hard to wrap our head around. But remember, I can also think like I'm adding 1/5 to itself 3 times. So one way to write this as a repeated addition question would be 1/5 added to itself 3 times. Well, we just talked about how to add fractions together, and the way that we add fractions together is we need to have the same denominator. And the nice thing here with this repeated addition question, we do have the same denominator. So the denominator of our answer is 5, and with the numerators we just add them. So 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So what that means is 1 over 5 times 3 equals 3 over 5. Well, let's look at another example. Suppose we have 2 over 11 times 4. If I want to write that as a repeated addition, I can write it as 2 over 11 added to itself 4. And now when we follow our rules for adding fractions, which we just learned, the denominators have to be the same, which once again the nice thing here is they are. All the denominators are 11, so the denominator stays the same in the answer. And in the numerator, we just add the numerators. 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 8. So when we add 2 over 11 to itself 4 times, as this multiplication question tells us to, we get 8 over 11. So here are the 2 examples that we've seen so far with multiplying with some fractions involved. In each of these questions, only one of the numbers was a fraction. But if we had to write the other number as a fraction, for example with the first question, the whole number there is 3. Well, as we learned in mixed numbers and improper fractions, to write 3 wholes as a fraction, the easiest way to do that is to write it as 3 over 1, because a fraction is a division question, and 3 divided by 1 is the same as 3. Similarly, with the second question, if I want to write 4 as a fraction, the easiest way to do that is to write it as 4 over 1. So what we can see is a couple of things here when we're multiplying fractions. First of all, it looks like we don't need to have the same denominator. So in both of these cases, when we multiplied these, the denominators, as you can see, are different. We're going to explore this a little bit more before we start to look for other patterns in multiplying. So the next question we're going to look at is where we're finding half of something. Now, if I asked you to find half of a number, for example, half of 8, you would probably tell me that half of 8 is 4, and you would be right. And if I asked you what math you did to do that, you would probably tell me that you divided 8 divided by 2. So when we're finding half of something, we are dividing it by 2. But if you recall, this word of usually translates into times. We're going to talk about in the next video on dividing fractions, we're going to talk about the connection between how finding half of something is the same as dividing it by 2. And really finding half of something is dividing it by 2 and seeing how much is in each piece. So for example, if I find half of 8, we divide it by 2, which is 4, and that's how much is in each piece is 4. So if we have to find half of a quarter, well, here I have a quarter of a pizza on the board. If I divide that in half, and I see how much is in each piece we have an eighth. So we can say that half of a quarter is an eighth. Well, now if I go ahead and translate this into a math sentence, that word of, once again, that means multiply. So a half of a quarter means 1 over 2 times 1 over 4. And multiplying by a half is the same as dividing by 2. And again, we are going to explore that connection in our next video on dividing fractions. But that word of means times. When we're finding half of something, we divide it into 2 pieces and see how much is in each piece. And as we did here, we divided a quarter into 2 pieces and saw that in each piece there's 1/8. So 1 over 2 times 1 over 4 is 1 over. So here are the 3 examples of multiplying fractions that we've looked at so far. And once again, we can recognize here that with multiplying fractions, unlike with adding and subtracting fractions, it looks like we don't need to have the same denominator, and we don't. And what you've probably also recognized by now is that to get the answer, we just multiply straight across, basically. So for the first question, when we're multiplying those 2 fractions, we multiply 5 times 1 to get our denominator. 5 times 1 is 5. And we multiply 1 times 3 to get our numerator, which is 3. For the second one, 2 times 4 in the numerators are 8. 11 times 1 is 11, so that's what we get in the denominator of the answer. And in the third one, in our numerators, we have 1 times 1, which is 1, and 2 times 4, which is 8. So once again, with multiplying fractions, it's actually a lot simpler than adding and subtracting fractions, as we don't need a common denominator when we're multiplying fractions. We just multiply straight across, numerator times numerator, and denominator times denominator. So to finish off our introduction to multiplying fractions, I want you to try a couple of questions here. You're multiplying these fractions, and again, remember you're just multiplying the numerator times the numerator and the denominator times the denominator. One thing though is take a look at your final answer and make sure that it's in simplest form. If it's not, make sure to reduce it to simplest form. And if you end up with an improper fraction, make sure to write it as a mixed number. If you're able to multiply these 3 fractions, congratulations, you now have a firm understanding to an introduction on how to multiply fractions.